Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Confident Parenting podcast. My name is Julie. If we haven't met before, I'm a mom of three, an occupational therapist, and I coach moms, which I think undoubtedly is one of the most valuable things that I have ever done. And I'm excited today to talk about something a little different, but I think it's important because when my kids were much younger, they're now 10, 7, and 4, these are the kinds of questions that I look to the internet for. I should have a segment saying, these are the things I Googled, or these are the things I searched for, because this is what I want to talk about that I feel like I couldn't find when I needed. And today we're talking about how to make your children into good readers, into avid readers. And there are a couple of things I want to talk about quickly, but the one thing is, why do you even want your child to be a good reader? I think that's one of the hopes and dreams that we have as parents for our children, and the research backs us up, because ultimately something that differentiates people that do well in school or well academically or just have an easier time, if I'm being honest, in school, and as you raise your kids you'll realize there's a lot of pressure on them, so if you can help them out and make things a little bit easier for them, why not do it? The reason that I'm so focused on it is because that studies show that children that have improved vocabularies, which comes from reading, no surprise, do better at school. And that's basically the differentiating factor. You know, we're all in this sort of bucket of an intelligence scale. I think, obviously there are outliers on both extremes, but most of us are going to fall into this like average intelligence bucket. I'm highly simplifying it. I know, don't come at me. But what differentiates one child who has the same genetic intelligence or the same IQ level as another one, and often that comes down to vocabulary and reading. So where you can build a culture of reading in your family, your children, even though they don't know it yet, they will thank you, even if it's just subconsciously. And so I want to talk about how I have tried really hard to build that in our families, some of the struggles that we've had, because it hasn't been straightforward. I do think, if you do a poll on people and you ask them, like, what are their hobbies? A lot of people will say that they love reading. And I think some people are just naturally drawn to books. But I also think some people come from a family of readers, of a family culture where reading was celebrated, the norm, expected, etc. And I wanted to be able to build that for my kids. There is something that I want to read for you, though, before we jump into how and why and what and all the things. So let me just grab it and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So in a funny twist of events, my husband went to back to school night for one of our children. Let me know if you have back to school night in your school. I don't know if we had this as children. Maybe they have it now in South Africa. I just ran to the other end of the house, so that's why I'm huffing and puffing. That's not a good sign. But anyway, and he came back with this poem that the teachers had printed out for all the parents, and basically you had to find your child's picture, and then there was a poem underneath it. And I promise there is a point to this, but I want to read this poem. It relates to reading, but it relates to everything in parenting, and I thought it was really lovely. So I will read it, and then we can discuss it when, how, and in a way that I feel like it relates to reading specifically. All right, here we go. When you thought I wasn't looking, you hung my first painting on the refrigerator, and I wanted to paint another. When you thought I wasn't looking, you fed a stray cat, and I thought it was good to be kind to animals. When you thought I wasn't looking, you baked a birthday cake just for me, and I knew that little things were special things. When you thought I wasn't looking, you said a prayer, and I believed there was a God that I could always talk to. When you thought I wasn't looking, you kissed me goodnight, and I felt loved. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw tears come from your eyes, and I learned that sometimes things hurt, but that it's all right to cry. When you thought I wasn't looking, you smiled, and it made me want to look that pretty too. When you thought I wasn't looking, you cared, and I wanted to be everything I could be. When you thought I wasn't looking, I looked, and I wanted to say thanks for all the things you did when you thought I wasn't looking. So this poem, I should have said, is When You Thought I Wasn't Looking by Mary Rita Schulke-Sill, written around 1980. So not that long ago. Let's not get our knickers in a knot. And it just illustrates this idea of role modeling of how so much of what we do as parents and what actually lands with our children is kind of not always our conscious behavior and not always performative. It is things that we just do habitually without even realizing that they are looking and absorbing and taking that through into their own life. And I feel like reading is one of those things that when we have this environment of reading, it's kind of how we get our children to be avid readers, kind of how we could get them to do anything, good or bad, right? So before I get into that and the role modeling piece, because that is huge, the other part that I wanted to talk about is just as much as what we provide for reading, like having books in the house or going to the library, these are all good suggestions, sending them to school where you would expect there is a culture of reading. It's also important what we don't provide. And I think in this modern society, it is so much easier for children to get onto screens. They are very enticing. They're designed to hack our brains, give us that dopamine. And in a way, I feel like we can't really compete with an iPad versus a good book. We can't really compete with television versus getting lost in a story or maybe an audio book or something like that. So it's important that you structure your environment if you want an avid reader. And as I said, it'll make their academic lives so much better. It'll make them so much more articulate. It'll just help them throughout their lives if they know a lot of words, if they have a diverse vocabulary. It'll stand them in good stead in no matter what profession or career or circumstance that they find themselves in. So, I mean, why wouldn't you want them to be a good reader? But the thing is that if they are surrounded by electronics and things that steal their attention, why wouldn't they go for those, you know? And so I have been super intentional in our home about reducing the amount of screen time that we have access to. I've spoken about this a lot. I try my best. It's not always possible to not have any technology. That's not what I'm about. Our kids do classes on my computer, and we do allow my 10-year-old to play like very sort of basic, well, like not basic, non-violent video games, I guess. And maybe our video game relationship will change as he gets older. He's currently 10, but we're pretty strict that we only really do screen time just for pure pleasure, like watching a TV show or something on the weekends, or maybe watching a family movie. They do not have daily access to tablets and things and phones and things like that. Although I know my son would love that. But every time we've allowed him to kind of have more free reign on his iPad to talk to his friend, it kind of always goes sideways. So anyway, this is not what this video is about, but I would just, if you want to help yourself succeed, I would do a screen time audit of your family. And if your kids are small and you're able to have full control over the culture of technology in your family now, I would start it now. I would not introduce phones at the dinner table or iPads in restaurants. I'd be very careful about when you allow an iPad in public or anything. Like, we only really do it for airplanes. We don't do it for car rides or anything like that. Because once you start that, it's much harder to stop. Not impossible. You can absolutely change your relationship with screens at any time. You're the boss. But I'm just helping you, trying to make it easier. Just learn from my mistakes. But anyway, so remembering that cultivating a culture of reading is about just as much what you don't have as what you do have. And obviously every family is different and every child will be different. Some kids will be really prone to television addiction, if you want to call it that, and others won't care as much. And it also depends on their age and everything. But that's just been my experience. So then what do we want in our environment? Well, according to this poem, it's super important that you model the behavior that you want in your children. So the first thing I would do if I was starting all over again is I personally would cultivate a reading habit myself. I have found that I go through periods where I'm on my phone a lot more because the books that I'm reading are not gripping me. And I think that probably comes from too much technology. You know, reading requires more effort and it is not as instantly gratifying perhaps as a phone can be. I mean, it depends on the book. And if you find the perfect book, fantastic. But, you know, if I try to read nonfiction books to make myself smarter, to introduce more vocabulary to my brain, often they're a little dry. If I'm being honest, they're not going to grip me like a video would on my phone. And so I have to be really careful. But when I feel like screen time is gripping me too much, and this is not the message I want to be sending to my children, I want to be demonstrating, walking the talk. I want to be showing them that I read, that I am a reader. Then I get books. I like physical books more than Kindle books or electronic books, but I mean, I will read them. And I role model that, because even if I'm not saying, hey, look at me reading a book over here, they somehow osmotically pick up that I'm reading and that this is what we do in our family. And so it's been interesting because we have had to kind of go on this journey with our first child. We didn't really know what we didn't know. We didn't know if he could read or not. He did his kindergarten year during COVID, so it was like all over the show, and he didn't love reading aloud to us. So I didn't really know how well he could or couldn't read. And so it's been interesting learning how children learn how to read and finding books that pique his interest. So tip number 1 is to role model the behavior that you want, whether it's reading or otherwise. And tip number 2 is to find books that they enjoy. Now, this takes time and effort and energy because you might not automatically know what they like. And sometimes they just want to read the same thing. So for example, they might be super into, I have a son, so like boys, comics, graphic novels, not that girls are not interested in that, but I found that I have a daughter, my next child is a girl, and she's also into it, but I think he maybe a little bit more. And also when you're starting to read, they're a little easier and less intimidating because they have a lot of pictures and shortened sentences. So they're a great like gateway into reading books because you really have to find something that's going to take off and they're going to really enjoy. So I found in the beginning he was really into facts and nonfiction, as I think a lot of little boys go through. Like they go through their phases, their rock phase, their dinosaur phase, their space phase, kind of all do this. It's funny how it's like programmed in there. And he was super into science. He was into reading. He loves Minecraft, so super into reading about Minecraft. But there is something that you are missing when you only read nonfiction. It's encouraged that they read fictional books as well and stories and understand sort of an arc of a story, the hero's journey. There are other words that are introduced. There are themes that are important because reading is so complex, actually. Like it's not just reading a story, it's being able to retell that story, to understand, to extract certain concepts. And a lot of these things are developmentally appropriate. They don't come out at once. You're not going to expect a 7-year-old to be able to analyze a piece of literature like you would a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 25-year-old. This is part of human evolution and development. But it's important to get into the habit early and when they're young, for them to just find books to be their friends, books to be maybe their escape, books to open them up and expose them to worlds that are not their reality. And so finding something that they really enjoy is very critical. I found early on, my son is like a sensitive, I don't even know if sensitive is the right word, but he really immerses himself in a story. So whether that is like a movie or a book, he will get so lost in a book that I will call his name and he won't pay attention to me. He won't hear me, right? And I know this happens to other people too, when you get so immersed in a world that you're totally oblivious to what is going on. And like, I love that for him. I want that for him. But he also really takes it to heart. So certain books have been too kind of scary, I guess, for lack of a better word. And also we've tried these things when he was younger, so now he might feel differently. But I also don't want to expose him to violence that he doesn't like or doesn't feel good about and like force that on him. So there were certain books, I remember there was like the Percy Jackson series, which if you have elementary school child, you might have heard about it. And I think it's a movie or a TV series or something. He read maybe, 100 pages of that book. And he was like, no, this is too scary. I don't like this. And he was consistent about that. Like there were just certain scenes and things that in the movies he didn't want to watch, in books he didn't want to read. And so we had to find like novels for him, which are typically fantastical, like fantasy books, but that were not scary. And unless I go and read all the books myself, it's a little challenging to know what he's going to enjoy. And especially when you're trying to cultivate a new habit, I want him to have a positive experience with the book. Otherwise, he's not going to want to read anymore. And as I said, reading takes effort and energy. Especially when you're a new reader and you're learning and some of the words might be too much for you. So, you really want to find the right fit so that he has a good positive exposure and continues to read. I will say though, we have gone through moments where he's been like a reluctant reader, I think is the term, where he doesn't want to read books for pleasure. And then we go through periods where he's reading so much. And we've obviously hit the nail on the head with the right mix of challenge and interest. And he's really enjoyed a series of books, and he'll read like a whole book in a day. I mean, to have that kind of time, honestly, I'm jealous that he just has no responsibilities in the world. He can just sit and read for hours on end. But it has been really interesting to see his focus. And when he's really into a book, he can do it. So we have gone through that. It hasn't been so seamless where, you do get children that just love reading from the beginning, and there's no pushback to getting them to read books. They just read everything and everything. I feel like my second child is more into that. She's been a confident reader since the beginning. She reads out loud in English and in Spanish. She doesn't seem to have an issue with that. But it's also, again, if I give her a book that's too challenging, she won't read it. So, and not even that. Sometimes they don't even try. It's kind of like with food. If you put a new food on a child's plate that they perceive won't taste good, they won't even smell it. They won't even taste it. They won't even try. It's the same with a book. If you give a book that, at least this is what I found with my kids, if you give them a book that's too big, they think is too big, or the writing looks too small to them, they won't even try it. Without a lot of encouraging, they will just give up before they've even started. So you've got to have this Goldilocks effect of the right type of books. And actually, one of the recommendations, my daughter's in second grade, one of the recommendations that her teacher said was to give them easy books. Like, she suggested books that are probably below their grade level, because she's trying to foster that independence where they can attack any book and feel good about it. Because once you've mastered the skill of decoding and reading, you can figure out, maybe you won't know what the words mean, but you can figure out a lot of words. But I think most people stop reading at a third grade level. So we need to be continuing to improve our skills, which would include reading a little bit faster, recognizing things at a more rapid pace, being able to take in a whole line of text at once. That'll help with your speed of reading. And being exposed to lots of different types of words. So you're not seeing this big word for the first time, you actually understand what it means. Because when you start to get tested and when you are given random passages for comprehension, you don't know what you're going to get. You can't really prepare. I mean, life is your preparation. You just have to hope that you understand the gist of the passage so that you can answer questions, because that's how you're going to be graded. And it can be very stressful if you don't know what they're talking about. So this is kind of, a big reason why in academia reading is so crucial. I'm trying to think what other things have really helped. I think we have also introduced a lot of audiobooks. So I was on a manhunt for how my children can listen to audiobooks, preferably without me. So without my phone, because I love Audible. I feel like I'm an audio learner a lot of the time. So a lot of those nonfiction books that I was talking about that I want to know the knowledge about, I will listen to them and do stuff while I listen, versus reading the text. Because as soon as I read the text, my mind is all over the place if I'm not gripped. So we started doing audiobooks, and we started doing children's stories in the car on the way to school and things like that. And then it morphed into getting a Yoto. If you don't know what that is, I highly recommend you look into it. They are not cheap, but I think are worth the money. And as an alternative to screen time, if you don't do screen time in your house or a lot of screen time, they will be your best friend. But essentially they're like a Bluetooth speaker with a brain. So you can put cards in and you buy the cards, and those are books, and then your children have full autonomy to listen. And it's not really connected to the internet. It only needs to be connected to download the book from the card, but they don't have access to the internet. They're not, it's much better than an iPad in that way, because they can't text anybody, communicate with anybody. And so I think a Yoto is a great big gift, and you don't need one for each child. I mean, you can, but I haven't introduced headphones with the Yoto. You can have it with headphones, but I have it as a speaker basically, and so multiple kids can listen at the same time, and I know what they're listening to, and they're still kind of involved in daily life, because just like reading books, they get so absorbed into the story, and then when I'm talking to them, they're not responding to me. So having that culture of audiobooks, and ideally having them listen to audiobooks that are above their reading level. So obviously being able to listen to a book is much easier than actually reading it yourself. It's much more passive, and so you need less effort. That this is a way to introduce new vocabulary without them having to read it. But you still need them to actually visually see words on a screen, like on a piece of paper, because this is how you learn how to spell. This is how you learn where words are placed. This is like just how I find that I also, even though I'm an audio listener, because I'm an adult, I've obviously been exposed to a lot of words, but I like to have things visually out for me as well. So I know, especially like people's names, if I'm not familiar with them, I like to see them written down. And the same kind of when you're learning how to read and with books, I think having that. We have done a combination of, I buy secondhand books if I can find the book secondhand, and I go to Goodwill sometimes, or I buy secondhand on Amazon. And then also buying new books if I really have to, books that I think we're going to keep and read as a family. And then also going to the library. And recently, a big hack that I think I mentioned in another video, but a big hack that I have found really helpful. We went to a bookstore and my husband took a picture of all of the middle school readers, is what they call it. So that's my son's age, like sort of 8 to 12 years old, because we never know what is popular right now, like what are kids reading, what would be good for his age group. And he took a picture of all of that. He got ChatGPT to put them all in a list, and then we've been ordering them from the library, and it's been like the best thing ever. The stress is that we have to return them, and so I'm always like, you need to read this book, and I try not, and I guess that's another tip, is I try not to force him to read. Sometimes I get frustrated because these books are library books and they do need to be returned. Someone else is waiting for them. But you know what? Sometimes you just don't feel like reading a certain book. Like you're just drawn to this kind of idea or topic. And so, I try my best. We can always renew the book, or I can return it and we can get it in at another time. It's not the end of the world, but accessing your local library, taking your kids to the library and letting them choose or see, I do find that to be very overwhelming for them. So I like to kind of order books on my app, like online, and then go pick them up myself. But just taking them to a library and being exposed and seeing everyone having a good time, I don't think that could hurt them. So that's a good thing. And they obviously do library time at school, so they know the concept of what a library does and is. And I think that's really important. So these are the things that have really helped us. I feel like we are on a good trajectory for having lifelong readers. I think eliminating television as the go-to entertainment has forced my children to have to pick up a book. I also sometimes just leave books lying around sometimes and see if anyone's interested in it. And I think now that my 7-year-old can read, I think she gets a lot of self-satisfaction. It really builds her self-esteem that she can now read a book, because I'm sure for a while she knew that she wasn't reading at the same level as my son. And also actually I taught her how to read during kindergarten, or the start of kindergarten, something like that. I started teaching her how to read. And I think the book I used, I'll put it down below. It's I teach my child to read in 100 easy lessons or something. It's something like that. And one of the teachers at her school recommended it. And I've also seen that it's very popular online too. But that book seems to work. And I think if you can give your children a head start of just learning the practicalities of reading, the actual just breakdown of reading and how sounds come together, if you can help them so that it's not the first time that they're learning this in school. I think the mistake we made the very first time with our first child was just expecting school to do it all, thinking that they were going to teach him how to read. And they did, but I think I was kind of out of touch. And to be fair, I was working a lot. We were going through a global pandemic. And then at some point I had a second child already and I had a new baby. So fine, we were busy, but I wish if I could go back, I would have taught him how to read myself, or just at least supplemented his learning so that he would have felt more confident going into first grade. And then also he was put into a dual language environment. So it was all kinds of messed up. You learn all these things in hindsight. And we'd moved and it was kind of a disaster. So I would have done that, I think, to help him. I think he's all caught up now and everything, and thank goodness. but it was stressful because I know how important reading is, and I kind of just assumed it would just happen. And I'm sure it does for some kids, but not for everybody. And so you have to you have to see what your kids' strengths and weaknesses are and see how you can help them. And I think had I taught him to read myself, I would have been able to identify certain things a lot sooner. So that is something. I will leave that book down below if you're curious. I highly recommend that. And I honestly, this is a good reminder to start with my 4-year-old. We've started letter recognition with her, just a little bit, 10 minutes. But she's still little, so I'm not going hardcore. She's not expected to be able to read at school. And as an OT, we were always told to err on the side of caution and not force kids to read early. I think we were taught to kind of follow sort of the more Swedish, Finnish model where they only teach kids how to read at 7 years old because that's where their brains are more developmentally apt to read. But I think here in the States, the expectation is that you can read by the end of kindergarten, definitely read at the start of first grade. And if you can't, you fall behind. And it's not because there's anything wrong with you intellectually. It's because you haven't been taught, or you haven't been taught in the way that clicks for you. And so that's just devastating to me that could be one of my children when there's something I can do about it. So I would definitely recommend that book. I would definitely recommend all the tips that I've mentioned. Be the reader yourself. Be the one that you want your children to turn into. Read aloud to them. Obviously, I should have said that. But I know most people know to read to their kids. Something I'll just finish with is I find sometimes, not all the time, but especially when my kids were little, reading right before bedtime was hectic for me. I was so exhausted. So if there are moments in your day that are not necessarily bedtime. Obviously reading is a great quiet time activity and it kind of soothes them to sleep. That's the idea at least. But if you need to read to them in the morning or at lunchtime or on the weekend at a funny time, do it. It doesn't matter. You can't overread to your child. And so it doesn't have to be bedtime when everybody's tired and stressed and you just want to read the shortest book anyway. Or we definitely have gone through periods where we're okay, one book, and then they go and choose 3 books and you're oh my gosh, I'm so tired. That's just the season of life with little kids. And so getting them, just exposing them to language and reading early, throughout the day, early on in life is obviously going to be super valuable. I think also reading aloud to kids, even when they can physically read themselves, is very important. That's kind of like the audiobook, reading them a story that might be above their reading level. But just the bonding that comes with that and reading books. And there's so many classic children's books that I personally never read as a child that are really fun to experience together. We listened to Anne of Green Gables together. I don't think I ever read that as a child. My daughter's read The Wind in the Willows, or she's listened to The Wind in the Willows, and The Little Princess. I love that book. And The Railway Children and things like this. These are all classics that are really important foundational reading for children. And a lot of them I don't remember or I didn't read myself. So I think it's great to go back down memory lane and read those. And yeah, I wish you luck on your reading journey. It's super important that if you can set this up in your family, you will change the trajectory of your children and their experience and relationship with learning and school and academics. So I hope that you will join me on this learning journey. And I can't wait to see you guys in my next video. If you enjoyed this, please go ahead and subscribe. Give me some topics down below that you want me to talk about, things that you're struggling with in your day-to-day life that you might want us to discuss further. Give this video a like, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.